Good morning, and welcome to Calvary Covenant Church Online. My name is Kendall Churchill, and as always, it is so good to be with you. Have you ever felt like giving up? That you just want to quit? Maybe you've given up from something recently, or you're thinking about it. I know I have, that there are moments where the world just seems overwhelming and you just can't even. Sometimes it just becomes so overwhelming that you lose hope, that there doesn't seem like there's a point to even try. But the stories that inspire us, the stories where we see people succeed in the face of overwhelming odds, those who oftentimes have the greatest stories of success, in fact, are those who refuse to give up on hope. Those who are successful despite the odds, who, like Colonel Sanders, he was in his 60s when he established the first KFC. That McDonald's was by a guy in his 50s. Walmart, he was 44 years old. Luke Skywalker, when he went to fight the Galactic Empire by joining the rebels, that was by hope. And we love stories like that. Who doesn't love a sports game, a sports story where the underdogs are overwhelmed, they have no chance, but they fight tooth and nail, and in the last minute, the last play, they win the game. We love those stories. We love seeing that hope is worth having. In opera, there's a saying that it ain't over till the fat lady sings, or as Yogi Berra, the great philosopher, once said, it ain't over till it's over. Well, today we're talking about hope. And we're looking at hope in the context of Jesus and within Jesus's genealogy. In the story of Christmas, we oftentimes focus on the manger, but in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 1, it starts by focusing on Jesus's genealogy, all of those ancestors, things that we oftentimes skip by, but they're really important because it's full of surprising people. In fact, there are 5 women mentioned in this genealogy in Matthew chapter 1, and those 5 women have 5 really important stories, and these 5 stories point to Christmas and our faith for today. And so today we're looking at our next woman in the genealogy. Her name is Ruth, and her story reminds us that there is hope because the story isn't over yet. Now, the context of Ruth takes place in between the time of the judges and the kings. So after Israel leaves slavery in Egypt, wanders the wilderness, gets to the promised land, there's these time of judges, these rulers by God. And then there's the time where there is Saul, David, and Solomon, these kings. And kind of in between this period, we find the story of Ruth. Now, the story of Ruth begins with a woman named Naomi and her husband Elimelech. In Judah during this time, in Israel, there's a great famine, so they move to Moab, a neighboring area. And in Moab, Naomi has 2 sons. And those 2 sons marry 2 Moabite women. But then tragedy strikes, and Naomi's husband dies, and Naomi's 2 sons die. And so she is widowed, she does not have any heirs, she just has 2 daughter-in-laws, and she can't care for them. And so Naomi says to Orpah and Ruth that she can't help them. She doesn't have any more sons for them. And so she says, I'm going to release you, return back to your family, to your homeland, to your families. They will take care of you, remarry, have a full life, have lots of kids, blessings upon you. They protest, but Naomi insists for them to leave. And so Orpah, one of the daughter-in-laws, she cries, she kisses Naomi, and she blesses her and goes on her way. But Ruth, the other daughter-in-law, she's a little bit more stubborn. Ruth says that she's not going to leave. In fact, she is going to travel back with Naomi to Judah. She's going to go to Naomi's homeland. And so in Ruth chapter 1, verse 16, it says this. Ruth speaking to Naomi, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. She has a choice at this point. Naomi's releasing her. She could go back to her family, or she could try to stick with Naomi. She could stay in the land she's familiar with her family that she knows, with her neighbors and friends that she knows, or she could go with Naomi. Staying here means that she would be at the mercy of her own people, or she could go with Naomi to the people of Judah and rely on their mercy. But meant that there probably wouldn't be a whole lot of kindness. There'd be a lot of risk involved. And that's the thing about hope. It involves taking chances, taking risks. But Ruth, she says, I am willing to be a foreigner. I am willing to go with you. I want to care for you. You are my family now. I will go with you. I will stay with you. Your family will be my family. Your land will be your land. Your people will be my people. And your God will be my God. She is making a complete allegiance to this new way of life. And this meant there would be risk of being taken advantage of, being a widow, a foreigner. This was not an easy choice. But Ruth knew that she could not control other people. She could not control the larger elements around her. But the one thing she could control was herself, her actions, her belief, her decisions. And she was going to care for Naomi. She was going to be faithful and loving. And so she acted faithfully and followed Naomi to Judah. Now the story continues that when they arrive in Judah, they don't have much. They don't have a whole lot. And so while they have some place to stay, they don't have money. They don't have food. They're in really rough situations. So Naomi says, hey, Ruth, go out to these fields nearby and you can collect some food there. You can go glean. A practice during those times that was part of the Old Testament law was something called gleaning, where the edges of fields were left up for the poor, the widowed, the orphans, for those who were in really bad situations. Not just the edge of the field, but as the workers collected and harvested, anything that fell to the ground was to be left, to be gleaned, to be picked up by those who were in tough situations. It wasn't just a handout. They still had to work for it, but it was a way of caring for those who were in bad places. And so, Ruth goes to a field, and she's working, she's gleaning, she's gathering, she's trying to get enough food to feed herself and Naomi. And Boaz, the owner of the field, he's working there, and he says to the other worker, oh, who's that over there? Who's that woman or that foreigner? I don't recognize her. And go, oh, well, that's Ruth. She's Naomi's daughter-in-law. And Boaz, he's touched by this. He hears about this kindness of leaving her homeland and taking care of Naomi, and he's touched by this. So he calls Ruth over and says, hey, I want to give you all this food. I want you to eat with me, and I have told all the men here to leave you alone, that you are protected. You are guarded by me. You don't go work in other fields. You can stay here. Unfortunately, during this time, for a widowed foreign woman, there was a lot of vulnerability and risk. But Boaz was saying, you are going to be safe here. You are under my protection. And she asked, why are you doing this? Like, I appreciate it, but this seems like kind of overwhelming. And he says, well, I hear you are caring for Naomi, and that is awesome. And this kind of points to who Boaz is, kind of his heart. Because remember, Judah had been in famine earlier. But as they've come out of famine, Boaz has decided that he's going to allow the poor to glean, allow for them to come into his fields. He's not trying to hoard his wealth or get ahead. Instead, he's following the laws and caring for the least of these. And so Ruth, she gets all this food. It's awesome. And she goes back to Naomi and says, look what all I got. She goes, where did you get it? And he goes, I got it working in this field with this great guy named Boaz. He's a little bit older, but he's been awesome. And Naomi goes, Boaz, Boaz, Boaz. Boaz is a kinsman redeemer of our clan, for our family. Kinsman redeemer? A kinsman redeemer is a family member who has promised to redeem anyone in the family who gets into trouble. If someone gets sold into slavery, or if someone runs into trouble, or if someone were to, say, be widowed and have no heirs and have no future, well, a kinsman redeemer would help take care of them. And so Naomi says, all right, Ruth, here's what I want you to do. I want you to clean yourself up, put on your best clothes. I want you to put on perfume. And tonight, when Boaz has had enough to eat and drink and goes to lay down, I want you to go to him, uncover his feet, lay at them, and he will tell you what to do. And so Ruth says, okay, I'll do this. Listens to Naomi. And so she gets all prettied up and goes to see Boaz. Boaz, after working a hard day and he's had enough to eat and drink, he goes to the threshing floor, a place where he'd been working, and he goes and falls asleep. Ruth shows up, uncovers his feet, and lays at him. And Boaz wakes up and goes, oh, who are you? Now, just a quick aside, because I know it comes up. The interpretation here is a little bit vague when it says uncover his feet. Whether it means that literally or if it is some sort of euphemism. It's not entirely clear what's going on here. But either way, she has made herself really pretty, has approached him in the night, and has kind of just presented herself to him. She's in a very vulnerable position. And when Boaz asks, who is this? Ruth says, it's Ruth, and you're one of our kinsman redeemers. And he goes, oh, no way. Here, I will take care of you. You are obviously a great woman, and I will redeem you and your family. I will marry you, and I'll help take care of you. Now, Boaz in that moment had a decision on how he was going to play it out. But we see him act the gentleman, and he says that he will take care of her. And why this is so interesting and what I find so fascinating in this passage right here is who Boaz is. Or more importantly, who Boaz's family is. Because Boaz's mother is Rahab. Rahab, the temple prostitute of Jericho, who we talked about last week from the book of Joshua, that Rahab is Boaz's mother. And she seems to have taught her son about respecting women. He doesn't take advantage of Ruth in that moment, but instead arranges to marry her. This is a radical reversal of Rahab's life, and thereby in the life of her family. It shows that she has been transformed, and her action is passing on through the family, through the generations. She's made a difference. This is really cool, I think. And so, the next morning, Ruth goes back to Naomi, and they wait. And Boaz goes to the elders of the town. He says, hey, there's one other person who's a closer kinsman redeemer. Would you like to redeem Naomi and the family? And after he declines, Boaz says, I will marry her. I will redeem that family. And he goes through the formalities to redeem her. And so in chapter 4, verses 11 and 12, it says this. Then the elders and all the people at the gate said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offering the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. Did you catch that right there? We're pointing out Tamar as well, another woman in the story of Jesus' genealogy. And so, in this, Ruth is claimed and redeemed. And even though she had no reason to hope by a lot of standards just a little bit earlier, she was a widow, she was a foreigner, she didn't have any standing or reason to believe outside of a trust in Naomi, her family, her land, and her God. All seemed lost, but she held on to hope. And the way the book of Ruth ends is so good. It ends with a genealogy. And it points out that Ruth had a son named Obed. And Obed was the father of Jesse. And Jesse was the father of this man named David. That it points out that this foreign woman has become the great-grandmother of the greatest king of Israel. Because of the faithfulness and hope of Ruth, we see the line of David continue. Oh, it is so cool to see this. That through these women who've had terrible situations, God has redeemed and used them, their faithfulness and hope. And now we see the story continue. In Ruth, we see some important things about hope, what it has to say, and some things to clarify what hope is not. Hope is not the same as optimism, finding the silver lining, or just simply wishing for things to be well. Hope is all about trusting in the power of another. And because this is a trust, this is not idle dreaming. Remember, faith always works its way out through action, that this trust must be acted upon. And so, our hope in the power that we trust in is to be God. God is the power that we place our hope in, both in who he is and what he has taught, what he has promised. It isn't based off of our desires, our wishes, our preferences, but rather saying, this is what God has commanded, and I can trust in that. Now, we see Ruth declare early on in the story that she is going to place her trust in the God of Naomi, and that she is going to trust in this God's plans. Now, hope by itself is not a plan. Simply hoping for something isn't a good strategy, but hope must be kept in the plan. Live trusting that it can really happen. And Ruth did not give up. She did not give up because she had hope. She knew that this was not the end of the story. She knew that there was more to come yet. And because she did not give up hope, she expected for change to occur, and she was not surprised, and she was ready to move when change presented itself. But so often, we don't have hope. We don't have hope in the future. We don't act in that trust, and we get stuck. And when we have no hope in the future, we have no power in the present. Where we place our hope determines our strength for today. And this year, we have exhausted ourselves. We have exhausted our patience. We have exhausted our confidence. We have exhausted finances. We have exhausted trust. We have exhausted, most importantly, a lot of hope. I mean, how often do we say, what's the point in even trying? Who knows what's going to happen anyway? You know, everything seems to fall apart, so why even bother? I heard one person say the worst investment you could make this year was buying a planner, because you just don't know what's going to happen. I think a lot of us have given up. We have surrendered our hope. And as a result, we can see the consequences. Relationships have been fractured. Families are divided. Participation in society, in church, in our religious institutions, they've dwindled. Our kindness has dried up. Too often, frankly, we hope little and expect even less. But today reminds us that the story isn't over yet. We are reminded in this season of Advent, as we approach Christmas, that Israel, the story of the Old Testament, was a story of waiting. A lot. I mean, they had to wait a lot. And a lot of this had to do with their hopes that hadn't yet been filled but had been promised, and they were clinging on to them. They held onto the promises made by God that they would be a great nation that would expand, that they would have freedom from enemies, that they would have freedom from slavery, that there would be a kingdom that would be mighty and great, and upon the throne would be a divine king who would be wonderful. But over the thousands of years of the story of Israel, more than anything, we see them waiting on the promise of a Messiah who's going to make everything right. But at the end of the Old Testament, we come to a point where there's no more prophets. There's no more signs. There's no more deliverance. There is nothing from God. And so the people are left with nothing but silence and violence. But some continue to hold on to hope, to trust in the promises that God had made, and refuse to surrender their hope. It is easy to believe and trust and feel good when the sun is shining and all is in your favor, when the world is bright. It is easy to believe, but hope is worth its weight in gold. It shows its value when it counts the most, when the world draws dark. Friends, do not doubt this day in the dark what you have seen in the light. Trust in and listen to God, to the promises he has made. Remember the stories of the past. Remember how he has acted in your life and in the lives of those around us and those who have gone before us. God is the God of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. That the stories of yesterday give us hope for today, that we might live and see it tomorrow. Our hopes and our prayers aren't always met as we expect, though. Sometimes they don't come in the time we want them to. And this is part of Christmas as well. They waited a long time. And when God came to fulfill his promise, it came as the baby Jesus, the one in the manger. Humble, simple. Not as people expected, not the king, the great ruler, Messiah that people had thought would come in on the mighty war horse to drive out the Romans, that they would establish themselves and they would rule over others. No, this was not who Jesus came to be. He came to teach, to feed, to heal, to love, to correct, to rebuke, to teach, to be sacrificed. This was the fulfillment of the promise of God. But it was greater than what people had anticipated, for the new kingdom was a kingdom not based on a geopolitical land unit, but rather a one that was spiritual and would continue to grow across all people, time, and places. That in this kingdom freedom would reign, but not just freedom from other powers, but freedom from sin, death, and evil. True freedom to worship and be the people we're created to be. And this is the God who reigns eternal with peace and love and justice and grace. This is God's hope for us today. It's the baby Jesus. It is the Jesus who lives, the Jesus who died, the Jesus who is resurrected, and the Jesus that will come again. We might not see how God can redeem the situations we're in. We don't know how it all plays out, if we will even necessarily get what we desire. But we do know that the story isn't over yet, that it ain't over till it's over, and that we can have hope. Friends, I send you out this day with this blessing. May God the Father make clear his plans and promises for you to cling on to. May Jesus Christ, his Son, be the source of your strength for today and hope for tomorrow. And may the Holy Spirit help you act in faith when all you have left is hope. Go in peace. Amen.